welcome back to Introspection and Introspective, something that dives deep into the realm of diving deep and trying to find out if there's anything left in there. Thank you so much for tuning in. Brought to you by okay. Good to be back. This is a Cooper Lyden for the Cooper Lyden is Alone podcast. Sorry I missed last week. I did not do it is what happened. That's why the podcast didn't get made, because I didn't make it. And I went to New Mexico, and we all know that a New Mexico trip will really throw off your equilibrium. That place, the magnets going on in that place. So just the magnets, let alone the ultraviolet light, let alone the infrared, let alone the dimensional beings passing through that place. It is a feast for the several senses we as humans don't have. Yeah, I was in New Mexico, going to San Diego today. I'm recording this last minute. Whenever I have to go somewhere, when I'm lucky enough to go somewhere for comedy over the weekend, I totally forget to do the podcast. And then I'm like, how do these rich guys do it? And then I remember that they're harder workers than me, and they plan better. So that's usually, and also they do it in bunches. And sometimes they don't have an episode, so it happens. But anyway, I'm happy to be here. I'm going to San Diego today, which I'm happy about. I found a good place with San Diego. I had a lot of issues with San Diego. Because if you don't know, San Diego is a great seaside community with some diversity, some different types of people there. But it's all, there's also like the Camp Pendleton there, and so there's a lot of Navy guys, and so it's there's a bit of a bro culture, a little bit of that, a lot of longshoremen, but it's weird because it's not like I guess there are bad parts of San Diego for sure, but it's not like a tough town, like it looks like just a place where like white people would live in the suburbs, except the ocean is also there. You know what I mean? It's like it's like parts of it almost feel Midwestern, But I've had issues with San Diego because I'm like, I don't get this place. You know what I mean? Like the people that come to the shows, like what is their deal? But then it's like, okay, so it's like they're like I would refer to them almost as like white liberal Trump voters. Like they might vote for Trump, but they can almost pass off as like a liberal kind of person, which I'm not ascribing a good or bad to either side here. I'm just saying that's the vibe that you get. And yeah, so that's Hello and welcome to the Cooper Lyden is Alone show, half-baked podcast. Today we are going to run through it. We're just going to get all the information we need to get out within 10 minutes, so this can be a short podcast and you guys can get back to doing whatever you need to do. Now, we'll go for as long as we can. I am leaving after this to drive to San Diego, and I have tons of time to drive to San Diego. I have so much more time than you have ever had in your entire life to drive down to San Diego. But I also just want to get down there. There's something, because it's something about like, you fly and you're like, if I can just make the plane and I can sit in that seat, then I will definitely make it to that place. But then when you're driving, you're like, okay, I just got to get all my shit in the car. And then you get all your shit in the car and you're like, now we just got to get there. And you're like, it says it's going to take 3 hours, but it doesn't. It takes like 3.5. And that half is just spread out through the most tense couple of minutes you'll ever have in your entire life when you're just sitting in traffic, just being like, time's going up. How's this going to work? I'm not going to make it. But no, I have a show in San Diego at 7. And then I have 4 more shows over the weekend that I'm opening for comedian Eric Griffin. So that'll be fun. I did not release a podcast episode last week. Sorry about that. I was in New Mexico also with Eric Griffin. So just so you guys know, even the slightest amount of comedy, even the smallest payment one can receive for the performance of stand-up comedy, even just these little gigs, are enough to really throw the entire podcast off and have it essentially not exist. So I'm sorry about that. I'll try and be better at keeping time. I always wonder. I'm like, how do these famous comics who tour all the time, how are they able to release these podcasts? And then I remember that they are smarter, more experienced, and better at planning than me. And then I go, oh shit. So this is just a matter of being good at getting things done when they're supposed to get done, which seems fucking great. It seems great to live your life early. If you're just a person who getting stuff done on time is the comfortable mode of being, what a life you must have. You must be president, you know? I think if you're that kind of person, you don't listen to this podcast. There's no way that if you're getting everything you need to get done, that this podcast is coming into the fray. You know what I mean? You probably have a routine. You wake up in the morning, you do some easy breath work, yoga, and then you eat a breakfast that is somewhat hearty, but also light and refreshing. And then you go to a job and you just crush it, and you come back and you're not even really that beaten down by the day because you've been excited to make dinner or do whatever nighttime routines you have. And then you probably watch like one episode of a limited series, just one, just somehow that cliffhanger at the end of the episode, you go, I'll wait tomorrow, and then you go to bed. And on the way to work, what are you listening to? I mean, Tom Petty, you know, stuff like that. This podcast doesn't come into the fold of somebody who is really crushing it, unless they're related to me, in which case that makes me feel bad that they listen to this and see how far their family's falling. But nonetheless, listen, somebody in a family, in every American family now, has to essentially have a news show where there is no news, and I am carrying that torch for my family. There has to be a member of every family that has a broadcast show. They broadcast weekly and somehow do not talk at all about the happenings of the day. How do I do it? You know, who knows? You know what I mean? Are you impressed? I would be, you know, with this level of dedication to a format-less, subject-less podcast. A lot of people couldn't do it, you know? A lot of people have guests. Fuck that. That's not the point of this. But, you know, we're happy to be here back in the studio. I'm excited to go down to San Diego. I feel a little more comfortable in San Diego. I will say I'm not going, I guess, technically to San Diego. I'm going to La Jolla, which is I think, a more rich part on the outskirts of San Diego where you would live if you want more room and a nicer place. Because every city, this is funny to think, every city has a contingent of rich, usually like rich older white people, but honestly, just rich people in general will all act like this if they have enough money. Where whatever city they live in, they go, I would never live in this city. And San Diego, if you've been in the city, there are some like not great parts I've seen, but for the most part, it's a very charming city. It has a very old, like kind of 1800s look. They preserve a lot of old buildings, especially in the what's it called, Old Town Gas Lamp District, whatever. It's a very charming city. And you know, it has homeless people, but definitely not to the extent LA has. But yeah, there are people in every single city that will look at a town that if they see one homeless guy when they go to dinner or a show at the big theater in the city, they go, we're not coming back here. We're never coming back here. La Jolla has small theaters, and that's how people get interested in independent theaters. They get so afraid of going to the city to see traveling acts that they then only see local grown culture because it's also next to the Yard House, which is a nice mid-level restaurant where you can get onion rings but like also a steak. That's where they want to be. They want to say, can I have a burger or can I have a steak? And it doesn't have to be good. It just has to be those things. I've gotten away from getting the best of anything because I'm too scared to go into a major city. So this is fine. So I'm wondering, I'm going down to do these shows, if those are the people I'm going to be performing to. Probably a few of them. I'm hoping Eric has some a little more fun young fans, but we'll see. You know, sometimes it's tough when you're the opener, and then you're the guy that nobody paid to see, but they do have to see before they can see what they paid to see. There's a weird hostage situation in the featuring act of comedy where it's like, listen, you didn't want this to happen, but it's happening, and it's going to happen for 20 minutes until you have laughed a little, and then you get to see what you came for. And really, that is the answer. You shouldn't have people come into a comedy club and immediately see what they came for, because they're not going to be ready. But also, it's an interesting position, because I go up there and people are just trying to either see a comedy show or see the guy they know from television and get out of there unharmed. And then they have to listen to 20 minutes of me talking, and I'm going to say a good 5 to 7 of that I might be mentioning gay sex. I might be mentioning things in my ass. And, I might be doing, I'm trying to do it in the most egalitarian, appropriate, and fair way to present the topics. But, sometimes it's just not what people came for. And I have to put on a happy face and let them know I want them to have the best time possible. And usually that'll end up with a set that you don't feel great about, but you say, well, that's fine. And then the headliner goes up and he has a good set, and you go, okay, well, I didn't ruin anything. And then you sit in that green room and you wonder yourself, is this for me? So that might happen tonight. I might also go up and have the greatest set of my life and think, this is my domain. I am Attila the Hun. I am Genghis Khan. And I will spread my seed all throughout the comedy world. So I don't know. We'll see how that goes. But who knows? I did have fun in New Mexico. If you haven't been to New Mexico, you should go. It's a place with no stakes. There's just like kind of nothing, but also everything they have is kind of their own thing, which I like, because it seems like the state in our union that kept the most of the people who were there before. Because I was in Albuquerque, there's a decent amount of reservations and pueblos for Native Americans and different tribes. And that's like that's pretty present in the culture of the area and with the people that come to the shows. Like the guy that was opening the show, he was talking about being Native, and the crowd was really responsive to that. And I think that's cool, because you go to Arizona and it's like just white people as far as the eye can see, and they're like red and they're all bald, or they have like half an inch of hair that's white and thin, and it just sort of sticks straight up out of their head. It's just a scary place. I kept making the joke in New Mexico, like, you guys are just nice Arizona, and it really is true, because they're so close to each other. But you go to Arizona and you're like, why are you all so angry? What is this? This is like, there's like a real like reactionary kind of stance to all of you, like where you're like, yeah, we live out here because you can hike and you're outdoors, and you're also not near those California taxes and crazy people, And then you go to New Mexico and you ask somebody why they like living there, and they go, I don't know, but I've been here for 23 years, There's a lady at the show, and she kept calling, it's the slogan is, or whatever, they call it the land of enchantment. And this lady kept yelling, it's the land of entrapment. And I was like, do you like it here? And she said, I don't know. And I was like, how long have you lived here? And she said, 24 years. And I was like, okay, so you kind of like it. And she was like, yeah, I guess so. And just laughing about it. And it's just funny because she's like giggling, but it's like her whole life, I don't think she made a mistake living in New Mexico. I think she does like it. I think she's having a little fun being like, I don't know why I'm here, But I don't think it's sad. I really like somebody that has lived somewhere for 25 years. And if you ask them if they like it, they go, I don't know. And they're not even from there. It's not like they were like, well, I was born here, sometimes you live in a place so long, you just feel, no, it wasn't any of that. She was just like, yeah, I don't know why I live here. I do internal auditing. Like, she had a job that exists in every single state. And it was like, yeah, pretty crazy. You go through New Mexico and you're like, so what do you guys do? You got, no sports teams. no major industry that I can really seem to discern, you know? There's like a weird amount of houses here, considering I haven't seen like a supermarket, you know? And then it's also one of those places where like we were there, and then the opener, his name was Josh Fournier. He's a very funny guy in New Mexico. He was like, yeah, Albuquerque in the city is like not great. There's like a lot of violence and crime there, and of course, you know, there is in any place that is big enough. There's just crime, and Albuquerque is one of those interesting places where it's big enough, but there's not a lot to do. So there's just sort of like enough stuff to do for crime to happen. You know what I mean? There's like not a lot of great nightlife, it would seem. You know, like maybe there's a few clubs, but there's just like a couple dispensaries and then like a Whataburger and shit. And like if that's all the town has to offer, people are gonna do opioids, you know? And people are gonna sell opioids, and you're gonna have a crime problem. And you could fix that just by you know, getting a Top Golf, getting a BJ's Brew House, getting an IMAX theater. You get an IMAX theater, you can keep criminals off the street for 3 hours of a Marvel movie. You know what I mean? It can really save lives if you have a nice enough theater display that could play. You know what they need to do is they need to get a theater, and they need to play Blood In, Blood Out, and This American Life 3 times a week each. And for, then you're racking up close to 12 hours of watch time that you have, criminals taken off of the streets. And I'm not saying that the only people that like those movies are criminals. I will say that all the people I've met who love those movies and say that they're the best movies ever also openly admit to having committed several crimes, many gang related. So I'm just saying, if you're going to play a movie that's going to attract at least a certain band of criminals, you can keep them off the streets. Because I don't think we're getting anywhere with like the current, prison system, or even a lot of the probation doesn't seem to work for a lot of people. And I'm not trying to fix problems that have already happened. I'm trying to stop problems. I'm trying to take preventative measures. And that's why, I think a laser tag, a movie theater, a roller rink, somewhere where people can do the Fly America flight simulator. If you don't know what that is where you sit in a plane seat and you fly over America. But you can see it. Like, I don't know, it's interesting for people. So something like that just gets people interested. Have a science museum, where you have like a Toyota Tundra truck and a rope, and then like somehow one guy can pull it because they have a certain use of lever systems that show how physics works. Stuff like that keeps people from forming an American cartel of sorts. That's always, tough. I realize that's becoming a lot of America. There's a lot of places that maybe used to be booming towns, when they were like a coal town, or they served as some sort of essential port even at some point. A lot of those places then become rundown, and drugs take over the culture. Or it's like a town where nothing has really happened besides people built the town. And at one point it was good because it was a town that served as a town. And for some reason, people wanted to live in that town, even if there was enough of some industry, or maybe not even a booming one. It was just sort of just existed. And then pills came into the fray, and that's just what the town became. That's like so much of America. If you really go to most small towns in America, it would seem that there is some sort of drug problem. Like, I can't find a single... And I don't go out on the road that much, obviously, so I haven't seen a lot. But I would love to know if anybody has any answers. Is there any small town in America that doesn't have an underlying opiate problem? Is there a single one? Because every time it's just like it either looks terrible, like it just looks shitty, there's nothing going on, and then you go, what do people do around here? And then the guy you're with goes, drugs. Or it looks really nice, And you're like, hey, this is cool. Like, so this is what people do here? And he was like, nah, this is like the one nice place. Everywhere else, people just do drugs. And you're like, okay, all right. I mean, whatever. It's like there's no relief, you know? Because they either look shitty and you're like, so this is shitty? And the guy's like, yeah, it's shitty. Or it looks nice, and then you tell somebody that lives there it looks nice, and then they make you feel like an idiot for thinking it was nice. They're like, well, I mean, yeah, kind of, but once the lights go out on this place, it becomes meth alley. And you're like, what? We're outside of an ice cream store that has lavender ice cream. You're telling me people are doing meth here? And they're like, yeah, aren't you from LA? And you're like, I guess I just believed other places didn't do this, you know? Because also it throws into the question the whole idea of like, listen, I don't think raising a kid in the heart of LA is really the best idea. At the very least, they should have a place to run around and ride their bike on the street safely. But it throws into question the whole idea that, like, oh, you can't raise a kid in that town because, like, well, what happens otherwise? You move to a small town that either looks charming but has this drug underbelly, or doesn't look charming and has an obvious drug underbelly, and your kid has nothing to do, like no art or culture or sports teams or extracurricular activities at school because there's no money. So what the fuck else are they going to do except drugs? It's like, yeah, you take them to this small town that I guess doesn't have a Skid Row. But also, it's like the people that are going to get your kid addicted to drugs are not your kid's not going to walk down to Skid Row. It's going to go to its high school, and it will meet some kids that do drugs, and then it'll hang out with those kids. And if you're in a major city, it might be easier to get drugs. But also, who's to say that's even more dangerous? Because if you're in a smaller city, then it's more dangerous to get drugs. So now your kids are like driving 30 miles out of town to a trailer park just to get weed. You know, they're in a meth situation just to get weed. So it's like, how's that safer than at least a city like LA with such a thriving drug market that a child can safely purchase drugs without being a threat because they're just one of many customers, you know? If you're in a small town and you're a child and you're trying to buy drugs, you got a real target on your back because there's not a lot of people in the community to exploit, and you could be a big moneymaker because you're young and you have your parents' money. So if they get you to keep coming back, you know, you could be a real cash cow. You could pay some guy's rent, you know. He sees that you're a big opportunity. You know, me as a young guy, you know, I'm not worth anything to any kind of coke dealer in LA because I'm just a young guy. I don't have enough money to really be a regular customer and ruin my life with him. And, you know, he doesn't have the time, or he's not desperate enough to be hitting me up being like, hey, I got deals so I can get you addicted to coke. You know, it's not even like that. You know, drug dealers in LA have enough going on that sometimes they can even say no to selling drugs to a child. Do you think about it? A drug dealer in a small town is going to be way more willing to sell drugs to a kid than he would be if he lived in a big city, because he knows that that kid might be his only business today. So, you know, you think you're a hotshot dealing crank in a New Mexico town, everything's going well, and then all of a sudden a 15-year-old shows up at your door asking for some shit, and you realize, you know, you don't have a thriving enough business to necessarily turn him down. In your heart of hearts, you go, I don't think a 15-year-old should be doing the drugs that I sell. But then again, we need to get some cash flow into this trailer so we can afford a larger TV. And then you're left with a very serious question, you know? I mean, that is just like a natural thing. It's like, I don't know why people act like the small town keeps away bad impulses. It only keeps away, like, you know, bad impulses and stuff if the people in the town are well fed, and they're not. You know, I think the idea is like, you know, in a small town, it's like you could maybe be cared for better. You know, like maybe there's less resources, but there's less people, so like you can have a more human experience. You can go to an emergency room that's not packed at 2 a.m. with a bunch of people from the streets, you know what I mean? But also, if you are in a small town and you don't have money, you're like the most desperate person ever because you're not in a place with a lot of money-making opportunities. So if you lose your job, it's like, well, fuck, how are you going to find another one? You know what I mean? Like, you got to hope that some of these restaurants are hiring, and if they're not, then, you know, how easy is it to turn to crime? Because you're in a small town, and it's not crime. It's just what your friend Leroy does for work, and then now, you know, Leroy is a 56-year-old white retired longshoreman who's on disability that sells his pills to make money. If you're wondering, that was the image that I was conjuring in my head. He is from Hoboken, actually, funny enough. So, but yeah, I don't know. I from touring, at least the small amount I've done, I've found that the small town America is, for the most part, a lie. And it would seem that everybody that lives in those towns is really unhappy with the state of the town. Because, I think I've said this before, but I'll do a joke where I'll ask people, I'll be like, do you guys have community pride? And it's always the same thing where one person will go, woo, oh. They go, woo, and then they stop their woo midway through and they realize nobody else is wooing. And they're like, oh, okay. I guess it sucks here. I guess we don't actually like it here, And then it just falls apart. And that's like most small towns. Like I am remiss to find a single small town where everybody's like, yeah, it's fucking great here. And my fear is that the only small town you're going to find where they say it's fucking great here is a town of just only racists, where it's just one of those towns in America that is still somehow just only white people. And they have like a few people of color, but they know their names and they know exactly who the fuck they are. Like it's such a, and those people be like, it's great here. And really they have a drug problem too. And you're like, well, why is it so great here? And they're like, it just feels safe. And really they're just racist, To a lot of Americans, the greatest place to live, the best outcome for them is a small town with very little work, a industry like coal that has completely died and left the town, but it's only white. And so for that reason, they just feel safe, even though they're not. There's big business coming in and tons of white criminals that are selling drugs to their kids. But in their minds, they're like, this is a good town. We're all good people. We all trust each other, and it's like, you really shouldn't. You're actually tearing each other apart. I don't know if you've taken a look at your town for 1 second. Everybody is high. Everybody is high. So that's why I'm excited, at least this weekend, to go down to La Jolla, because, La Jolla is a place that is close. It's I can understand it. I had a little trouble with San Diego to get the vibe, because I was like, you guys are interesting. You're like Southern California people, but you're also like kind of conservative. Like it's almost like you have almost like a beach Texas kind of vibe, because of the military influence. But, I've been down there enough. I like it. I like being down there. And also, I get to be by the ocean this week, which just feels like you're still at a place in the world that matters. Something about just being next to the ocean, even if you're in a shit town, the ocean is a place of tremendous biodiversity and also trade routes and, business, and things are happening. San Diego, it's got a port. It's a port town. Things are going in and out. And it makes it feel like things are happening, and I'm not too far from home. I get to drive, so that's good. It's just because it's so weird, especially comedy. I mean, I guess it just feels this way because I'm just not from these places. But like, you go some places and you don't have a car and you're staying in a hotel and you think, okay, well, maybe I can walk to do some stuff. And then you try and see, and there's nowhere to go. Like, there's just everywhere you go, it's just the same. It's just, here's another smoke shop, and here's like a Hawaiian barbecue place. You'll eat here every day for 3 days because it's just barbecue chicken and seems to be the best food in the entire town. You walk through that and you're like, how is this a country? Like, what was even the point of making this whole place a country, Like, it is weird to see what we've done with America, because I mean, we've done great things, There's all these, like, really bustling international cities that, I like to think have a positive influence across the world in some ways, Also have a profoundly negative influence, probably more so. But it's like, okay, so we did that. It's like we built these, like, monoliths to humanity, like New York City and L.A. I guess that's an achievement. You can say a lot of bad things, but that's an achievement. But then, like, the rest of the country, just so much of the country, like most of the country, is nothing. Like there's just this it's interesting how in America it's just like you're just like, so what is going on here? And they're like, well, I own this ranch. I own a swath of land that is bigger than some cities in the U.S., and it's just mostly just unkept rocky mountains and some farmland and some pastures where I have cattle and stuff. But this is it. And you're like, okay, so why do you do this? And they're like, because it's mine. Like there's a big, I don't know, there's a big thing in America to be like, to just have the biggest plot of the shittiest land in the world. And you don't even know if you like living there, but you just know you own it. And you're like, yep, this is what it's all about. This is what these motherfuckers in England don't have, And it's like, I don't know. I mean, I don't mind the European way of, having an apartment that's like good enough and it's close to a little market. You go and you get stuff for dinner every night. Like those people, there's some people, not everybody. There's, of course, land baroning and shit is all from Europe. But it just seems like over there's more of like they're not really insistent on owning everything. Like private property is so big in America that you can sell a guy a place that sucks. Just like, yeah, you can buy all this and you can live here until the day you die. And if you look around, you go, well, why would anyone want to live here? This sucks. It's ugly. There's nothing around. I don't know how I would not drive myself insane living here. But just the fact that you can own it, and that if somebody else comes on your land that is shitty and sucks and you don't even like living at, you can shoot them, is enough for people to be like, yes, I will pay millions of dollars to do this. Yes. The answer is yes. Of course I want to live here. Where else would I live? It's crazy. And I don't know, it also feels crazy, that like I have a fucking studio apartment and I pay what some people, more than some people pay for a mortgage in other places. That's been a weird thing, too. Like I was in New Mexico and I was talking to people and some motherfucker said he had a house and he's paying a mortgage and the mortgage was less than my rent. And I knew that places were cheaper. I never knew that like the salary I make as a 24-year-old could possibly cover a mortgage somewhere. I didn't think that was possible anywhere in the country. Which, answers my last question of like, why would you live this way? Why would you? Because somehow with the minimal amount of work that I'm doing, at least professionally to make money, I could still somehow have a house. Like, that makes you believe in what you're doing. Like, I think the good and bad of the city is that, it makes you feel like you're not doing shit, that you have nothing to show for anything you're doing. And you do have things to show for what you're doing. But also, since you're in the eye of the tornado, since you're at the epicenter of your career, you see the people really crushing it. And you go, oh, I suck. And that's like a good and bad thing, because you shouldn't think you suck, but you should also look at that and be like, oh, okay, so I am actually miles away from my dream. I park the cars of people whose dream, I want, I'm very far away from it. And that's like a good, it's good to be realistic about where you're at and let it drive you. But also it's like people in a smaller town who are like touring comics and have a job, and with the touring money and with the job are able to pay for a mortgage, or at least able to look at themselves and be like, comedy's actually going pretty fine because I get to tour a little and I make enough money to have this house. So like comedy's kind of working out for me, Then you kind of zoom out and you're like, well, yeah, but this person doesn't have like a career. Nobody knows who this person is. Like the chances of them making any kind of stable living off of stand-up are kind of slim to none. For now at work, so it's like, which one is better? I don't know. I think the answer is just obviously that making it in any sense is better, but that's not, it's, easier said than done. So I don't know. I think I'm going to move to like some town in Arizona whose name I don't even know yet, like move to some town in Arizona called like Blood Rock, and you're like, why is this place called Blood Rock? And you're like, well, because when the Pilgrims, when settlers came in, they picked a rock and they killed all of the indigenous people on it. So we honor that by calling the place Blood Rock. And you're like, are you honoring it? That seems pretty. It almost seems like sort of a weird victory lap you're running. And they're like, no, 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 no. That's not what this is. So I don't know. Has anyone watched the documentary on the little person who lived with a family, and then the family realized that she was older than they were informed, and they couldn't figure out how old she was, and also the little person was trying to kill them? Has anyone seen this documentary? Has anyone tuned into this? The Mysterious Case of Natalia Grace. I've been having a lot of fun watching it. It's actually a really horrible story. Because at first it seems like, okay, so there's like this Ukrainian woman who has a type of dwarfism that makes her very small, and also makes her features, she looks very much like a young kid. But she also doesn't in a lot of ways. Like, she has a pretty developed face, and then everybody in the documentary is talking about her tits. And then they like give her a bath on the first night because they think she's 6, and then the mom is like, she has pubes. So she's like at least like 12 or 13 when they get this girl. And this girl just has no answers for them, where they're like, how old are you? And she's like, I don't fucking know. And they're like, who do you know? Like, do you know anybody? And she's like, I don't know anybody. They're like, well, you're from Ukraine, right? What was Ukraine like? And she's like, shit, I don't know. They like bring in a lady that is from Ukraine and like speaks her native tongue. And the girl's just like, I got no idea. Which is not like that doesn't mean the girl is a liar. I mean, I think from watching this documentary, what I've found is that I don't think that this little girl is a swindler. I think they got her when she was still a minor. I think she was older than the court document said. I also think she might just naturally be a sociopath. It seems like a weird combination of these people adopted a kid who really is kind of like a teenager, and she's also a sociopath. So then it becomes this whole thing of like, well, you lied to us and you're really a grown woman. And then they eventually just put her into an apartment because they get the courts to rule that she's 22, when really this girl is probably like 15 at most. And she's also a little person and kind of a disabled one at that, so it's hard to get around. So they just like put this person who has very little physical capabilities, mentally is sharp, but is also mentally ill and like a sociopath, so is making pretty bad impressions around the area. Listen, I know I'm not telling this very well, but yeah, there's a very it's one of those documentaries where you can't, it seems like everybody's lying because everybody sounds insane. Like the adoptive father is just saying like, well, we got to a point where we were like, this person living with us is a lot older than they say they are, is probably an adult, has picked up knives and is trying to kill my wife, and we're just taking that as it is, and we're just going to try and live with that. And then you hear that and you're like, well, you're a liar, because that's not how people act when a mysterious a goblin of sorts enters their lives and then tries to kill them, So then they find out that like the mom is just beating the hell out of this girl. I will say the best interview in the entire documentary is this guy who is just a guy that lived near this girl Natalia while she was living alone. I think she's like 30 now. I don't know, but this guy was living near her. They interview him. He's shirtless. Then they pan down and you notice his belly button. He looks like he got stabbed in his belly button. Like his belly button is like 4 inches wide. And then under the belly button is like the same color of skin, but it just looks like a scar. It's very awful. So he's totally fine showing that to the entire world. But He's standing out there with no shirt, and he goes, "Yeah, Natalia. Well, I was in prison, sex crime. I did my time, but I learned to look around a lot. You're aware of your surroundings. That's what prison teaches you." Camera guy's like, "Okay," and he's like, "Yeah, so I saw she was a kid and just stayed away from that." And that's the entire interview. That's the whole thing. I don't know why they put it in the movie. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't tell us anything about anyone except him. And he's never in the movie ever again. Like, documentaries will sometimes just throw that stuff in, just be like, this was fucking crazy. This doesn't move the story, but this was insane, because he built it up so much like he was going to have some sort of analysis on her, and he was just like, yeah, so she's a kid, I can't be near those. And it was like, oh, gross. But, it is a sad story, because it starts off and you're kind of fully convinced that this is like a fully grown woman who's like tormenting this family. And then you keep watching and you realize later it's like, well, no, I don't think she was fully grown when she went to this family. I think she was like a teenager, and also like a horribly abused person. So she's just trying to kind of find a family. And she's also, making mistakes because she's a sociopath. So she's still sometimes trying to kill the family. So it's like a weird thing where it's like you feel bad, because this is obviously a very hurt person who's just, also has this disability that others them from other people. And then now they're just, like they could just be back home in Ukraine with their mom, but their mom didn't want her. So now they're in America and they're like a foster kid, and this lady Christine is beating the hell out of them, but also she's trying to kill Christine. So there's a lot of back and forth. And I mean, I don't know. It's just it's interesting, because throughout the whole documentary, it's like, even when they know she's an adult, they let her get away with too much stuff, because she like moves into this apartment community, and she kind of looks like a child. She's like under 3 feet tall. And they notice that she's trying to fuck all the kids. This is like a woman, who at this point in the documentary, we're kind of sure is like at least 17. Really shouldn't be living alone, but we're sure is like at least 17. And she's just walking around this apartment building, going up to like 9-year-old boys, like trying to suck their dicks. And then just going up to old men and just trying to suck their dicks too. And the whole community is kind of responding how people did to pedophiles in the 40s, where they're like, she's weird, just don't let the kids near her. We don't know what to fucking do. But it's like, it almost shows a weird, it shows like a weird kind of prejudice that is now benefiting her against little people, where it's like, even though they know she's an adult, they still almost treat her like a kid because she's so tiny. So she's like obviously a pedophile, and she's trying to fuck little boys, and they're just like, well, I don't know, she's just odd. So there's just this apartment community that has this little person who is a little deformed, walking around the grounds trying to fuck kids. It's almost like a medieval fable, you know what I mean? Like they have somewhat of a creature on their hands, And then it's interesting, because you hear this person talk, and you hear they're from Ukraine, so you think they're going to be like, I am not the killer or something. But no, they have a fully American accent. I don't even think they've ever been in Ukraine. And they're like, yeah, so it was really weird. I got like dropped off here by my mom, and I didn't want to live here. And you're like, oh, this is the sociopath, And they do kind of talk like a sociopath talks. Throughout watching the documentary, I've sort of started to wonder, I think this person, Natalia, doesn't have a personality. I think this is like a sociopath thing, where their personality is so dependent on who they're talking to that they almost don't have an essential self. If you also think, like, if you're an orphan dwarf from Ukraine who's just getting tossed around from family to family, you're never really finding a home or anybody to mirror. So really what you're doing, you're just trying to get through life. So, like, you can't really get comfortable in any situation, and you're not really learning how to act from other people because you're not really around them long enough. So all you're learning is just sort of this, like, tippy-toe survival of just sort of, let's just get out of this situation and into the next situation, And so it's like, yeah, there's, like, parts in the documentary where you're just like the dad is at her house, and he's like, where'd you get these donuts? Why are people giving you donuts? And she's like, I don't know. And you're like, well, she seems like kind of a sweet, helpless person, But then there's other times where like her neighbors were like, yeah, she just explained to us that she attempted murder and she acted like it wasn't a big deal. And so you're like, okay. So this is a bit more complex of a person. The way I see it, it's really just a sociopath's dream. Because if the little person, Natalia, is a sociopath, it's perfect because people underestimate her because she's a disabled 3-foot tall woman who looks like a 3-year-old. So that lets you get away with tons of stuff. And then if you're a sociopath who is working against her, you can get away with a lot of stuff because her she's like vaguely a citizen, and she's small and disabled, so you can just beat her up. And just every sociopath is taken as much time as they want with this little person. It's like the most. It's interesting because she's like the most exploitable person in the world, while also being the most exploitive person in the world. Because she has her own problems where like they drop her off at this apartment community and they're like, yeah, she wouldn't stop coming into our houses and taking our food. Like it's very. I mean, listen, I don't like drawing this comparison. I'm just saying a lot of the way she acts is similar to ways I have heard mythical elves act. It's mischievous, it is sneaky, it's stealing small, low-level, low-value items. It's just sort of a continued mischievous air to her that continues throughout the whole thing. And I'm at a point in the documentary where I would kind of like the best for her, at some point. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that it's like this person, they're not an evil mastermind, okay? They're a horrifically traumatized, in some ways physically helpless, disabled person who has been tossed around from foster family to foster family, who in her own right might be a sociopath, and even without that, probably grew some sociopathic tendencies from the callous nature of her entire life, of just sort of being chewed up and spit out by systems and families. And so what's the answer to that? I don't know, but the answer is definitely not putting her in a second-story walk-up apartment in Lafayette, Indiana, which, if you don't know, is a piece of shit place. Like, that was their last idea of this shitty adopted family, was to just take this person whose age they're unsure of, but they it's pretty obvious cannot take care of themselves. And they just put her in an apartment by herself. And then, for some reason, they thought because it was a white trash town, that all these white trash people would just ignore her and not help her, which I think you have to know so little about white trash. Because if there is a 3-foot tall little person who looks like a baby, and is also somewhat helpless herself, walking around a poor community, poor people are going to see that person and say, that's a baby. And no matter how old that person is, they're going to take them into their home and raise them. Okay? And, there's also a lot of terrible things that could have happened to her. But what did happen to her is some lady saw her and was like, that's a baby. And within 2 days was like, yeah, she's moved in. She's living with us now. And it seems very suspicious. But also the whole situation is suspicious. And so then the adoptive dad is like, I don't trust this lady. But then the lady's like, I don't know what the hell you were thinking. You dropped off this small ass person here in a shitty area. She hasn't had power for 3 days. Yeah, she's living with me. I don't care if she's 26. You see how tiny she is? She's a baby. Which is a kind of simple thinking that I think actually saves lives. Because some other people she was around was like, it seemed like she was having a tough time getting around, but she was an adult and we didn't really know what to do. It takes a poor American white to go, listen, I don't care how old you are. You're a baby, okay? That is clear as day. I know a baby when I see one. You can't reach the counter and you like candy. So, okay, that's what we're going to do. I'm also wondering if this person in the documentary, if this little person, Natalia, has one of those fetishes for being a baby. There's also a bit of that where it's like, it seems like they kind of had no childhood, or at least it was stolen away, by all the turmoil in it. So I'm like, it kind of seems like this person's plan is to pretend to be a baby their whole life, Just their whole life try and live with different families, sort of like a vampire that never ages. Like, what's your story? And I don't know. And honestly, I don't think that's not a bad way for them to live. Because I don't know what happens after this. But I'm at the point of the documentary where they're just living with a woman they met in Indiana. And she's like, yeah, just live with me. You're a baby. And I'm like, I'm looking at it being like, this is probably the best situation possible. Because everybody else is like calling her an evil sociopath, or they're trying to, take her money or something. I don't know. It's a whole thing. So there's also a weird thing where the lady she's living with in Indiana may be using her for her Social Security checks and money. But that being said, Natalia seems like she's the happiest she's ever been, because the lady does have control of her money, it seems like, but also has like 5 other kids, and Natalia's getting fed. So I don't know. It seems better than the situation that existed before, where Natalia is just a little person who's living in an apartment that is not handicap equipped, and they're not able to do anything. I don't know. It's just, and then like at one point, this guy's describing seeing his wife beat her up. And I was thinking, like, America and just life is so funny, because, like, imagine, like, you're a middle-aged man and you thought you would have a normal American life, but then you walk into your home, 2-story home in a nice suburb in Indiana, and you see your wife beating up your adopted child who is a disabled little person. And that's what you walk into in your home. And you must just look at that and just think, like, how did I get here, David Byrne was right. Like, is this my beautiful house where my beautiful wife is beating up our disabled little person adopted child? Is one of the most evil things I've ever heard of happening inside of my home right now by the woman I love to the person I considered a child until they, I guess, tried to kill me? Is that what's happening right now? Because if that's what's happening right now, just let me know, and I'll stop whining. It's really insane, the entire thing. So, I'll keep tabs on that. I'll let you guys know next week how everything is going with this little person and her adopted family. Also another funny thing. She looks a little scary because she looks like an adult and a kid at the exact same time. And they explained that when the landscapers would come by in Indiana, she would hide in the bushes and then pop out at them. And I was just thinking, like, man, that's so crazy to, like, you walk from Guatemala or something, like to escape, or El Salvador, like to escape political or social strife, and then somehow you end up in Indiana and you're just working as a landscaper trying to survive. And then all of a sudden, just truly in your eyes, a goblin pops out of the bushes. And you're just like, why did I come here? Gosh, really riveting stuff. I'll be back next week. Sorry this episode is a little shorter. Sorry if it was boring. My life sucks and everybody wants me to die, so that's usually what you get. But anyway, thank you so much for tuning in, and we will hopefully be back next week at the regularly scheduled time. Thank you.